In this video, we're back to show you more ways to control functionalities on the NMC using Redfish-like APIs. First, we will demonstrate how to upload certificates and firmware and deploy firmware using the Redfish API. In the certificate service, we can note that this account has two keys. We can specify the path on the local machine to upload the new certificate using the curl command. After the upload is complete and the page is refreshed, key 0831 will pop up in the list. Next, we will continue to upload the firmware ready for later deployment. We will call the getChassis OAPCD0815 API again to confirm the deploy target of the node. Our target is the 6694 kernel. Let's record this information for reference. Next, we retrieve the name of our latest key from the certificate location in certificate service. We'll use this name to grab the key ID and note it down. Now, it's time to upload the new firmware, setting the level, version, and the previously recorded target details and key ID. And we name this firmware FOTA0831. Once completed, we'll receive a firmware ID. We'll use this ID to download the manifest and sign it using the key we selected earlier. In the bottom right window, we can see that there are 5 files in the certificate folder. Now, we use the firmware ID to download the firmware manifest bin file into our certificate folder. Upon completion, an additional firmware manifest bin file is in our desktop certificate folder. Then, we use our key to sign this manifest, proving our authorization to upload firmware. Once signed, we can see a new file in the folder, the firmware manifest sig bin file. Next, we upload this file to the server using a command, selecting the file, and then entering the certificate ID and firmware ID. After successful verification, we see our newly uploaded file, FOTA0831 firmware on the firmware inventory page. We now move on to demonstrate how to deploy this firmware to the selected node remotely. Once again, we grab the firmware ID from the firmware inventory page. Additionally, we can scan the chassis list to pick out our deployment target. The device ID of OAPCD0815. Next, we need to set the parameters for the node ID and firmware ID for the upcoming firmware deployment. With everything in place, we send a request to start the firmware update. We then click on the task service on the web page. In the task list, we can monitor the status of the firmware update task. Selecting the last task in the list, which is the most recent deployment, shows that the current task status is ready. We can also use the curl command to retrieve the same information on the update task. Now, wait for a while. During this time, we'll refresh the page to catch the latest updates on the task state. After continuous refreshing, we noticed the task state had shifted from ready to working. Let's wait a bit longer for the firmware update. Okay, we can see now that the firmware update has been completed. And just like before, we can use the curl command to catch the update status done message. Through the extended functionality of the NMC Web Monitor, the Redfish API management interface not only eases your management efforts, but also provides you with advanced capabilities.